Welcome back to the Gerardus podcast. Today we're here with Arjen Bakker. He's this year a new teacher at the faculty, and he mainly teaches Greek New Testament and the afterlife of biblical text, and the text awakens for religious studies. And we're here to talk a little bit about the Christian calendar and how it came to be, and the thoughts and ideas behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So right now as we record this, it is still Lent, and the dating of Lent is 40 days before Easter, and the dating of Easter is, in my opinion, quite odd. It is the first Sunday after the first full moon in spring. Can you tell us a little bit how that came to be and why that is?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so maybe first let's start with the 30 days, the period in which we are now. So that's the period going towards Easter, which is also called Lent, which actually comes also from the German root Lent. We also have our word Lente from that. So it's a period of fasting. Traditionally, some people take it rather serious. Other people don't take it that seriously. But those 40 days actually are reminiscent of Jesus' time in the wilderness. So after Jesus baptized, he went into the wilderness, into the desert, and he was tested for 40 days and 40 nights by the devil, who asked him 3 different things. So it's actually a period of testing, and the first test of Jesus was actually to survive hunger, and then the devil asked him to turn stones into bread, and then Jesus says, "You will not live from bread alone." You know it probably very well. So that period of fasting is actually a kind of testing or purification, perhaps, referring to those 40 days of Jesus in the desert. And of course, the number 40 is also already symbolical. For example, the great flood in the book of Genesis, when Noah is in the ark, lasts for 40 days and 40 nights, rains for 40 days and 40 nights. Moses, when he goes up to Mount Sinai to receive the laws and the commandments from God, remains there for 40 days and 40 nights. The number 40 is also reminiscent of the 40 years that the people of Israel traveled through the desert, which is also a time of testing and purification. So all of those symbolic numbers actually add up to the number to the meaning of the 40 days of fasting, of preparation for Easter. And then coming to your second question, why is Easter planned as time, which is really, so it does not go according to our normal Gregorian calendar, and every year it's at a different moment in time. That's actually because the date of Easter is calculated according to a luni-solar calendar. It's actually based on a lunar calendar, which, as perhaps you know, a lunar month has 29 and a half days. That's the cycle of the moon. So that's the natural cycle of the moon. If you have 12 months of a moon, you have 354 days, right? So those are 12 lunar months. That's not enough for a solar year. So a solar year has 365 days. For example, as you may know, in Islam, the religious calendar is organized according to the lunar calendar, and the festivals travel around the year. The Ramadan, for example, travel around the year. But the lunar calendars have less days. Now, what they did already in antiquity is that once every few years, they add another month, an intercalation month, to come back to this system, to come back to more or less 365 years. So every 3 years you have a leap month, and once every 19 years you have another leap month. This is called the Metonic cycle, and that's actually the cycle, that's actually the basis for a Jewish religious calendar, and that is also the religious calendar according to which Easter is dated in Western Christianity. So the Catholic Church plans Easter with that Metonic cycle, and then the Protestant churches in the West follow the Catholic calendar. The Eastern Orthodox churches have a different date for Easter as well.
Right. And then after Easter, there's 40 days until Ascension Day, which the 40 days come back. But after that, it's 10 days until Pentecost.
Pentecost.
Is there a reason for that, or is that just the way it is?
Yes. I think our first point is from Easter to Pentecost, which is 50 days, and Pentecost also means 50, which is again a Jewish holiday, Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks, because that is, do I count correctly, 7 times 7 weeks, 49 days after the waving of the Omer. So there is a period of 50 days, which is another Jewish holiday. And at this Jewish holiday, people came to sacrifice in the temple. And it's also the day, according to the tradition at which the Torah was given to the people of Israel. So that's also celebrated on the Feast of Weeks. So these 2 weeks, the festivals of Pesach and Easter actually also form the basis for the calendar of, the festivals Pesach and Pentecost also form the basis for the Christian calendars of Easter and Pentecost. And at Pentecost is the festival of the giving of the Holy Spirit, actually the formation of the church, when the apostles received the Holy Spirit, according to the book of Acts, or the church receives the Holy Spirit. So that's really the formation of the church. So the relation between those two festivals of Easter and Pentecost really also builds off of the Jewish festivals of Passover and Pentecost.
And was the dating is alike for the Jewish calendar? Was the celebration very much in early Christianity very much like the Jewish celebration, or was it actually meant to replace it, or was it meant to be the same celebration just within a different religion?
That's a really good question. And actually, we don't really know the answer to that question. What we can say is that at a very early stage, Christians, followers of Jesus, made a connection between the Passover festival and Jesus, and the death of Jesus. And also at the very early stage, the death of Jesus was understood as a sacrifice. Or an atoning sacrifice, as we already see in the letters of Paul, which are actually the earliest Christian documents. Paul actually literally refers to Jesus as the Pascha, as the Passover, which can mean either the Passover sacrifice or the Passover festival, in the first letter to the Corinthians. And then he tells them that the Corinthians have to remove all the yeast from their community. It's in a passage about sexual immorality. So he uses that as a metaphor. Refers to the feast of unleavened bread before Pesach. In Judaism, you have to remove all yeast from the house because the Passover feast is also known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of the Matzot. Maybe you know matzahs.
Yeah.
So during the Passover feast, there can be no yeast in a Jewish home. It all has to be cleaned out. Why is that? That is because and I think then we have to go a little bit further back to the beginning of the Passover festival. So in the book of Exodus, as you know, it recounts the story of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob who then come to Egypt at the end of Genesis because of a famine. And then Joseph became the Pharaoh's one of the Pharaoh's ministers, and the people lived there. But after Joseph had died, the Pharaohs forgot who Joseph was, and the people of Israel lived in Egypt, and they grew and grew and grew and became and multiplied. And then the Pharaohs started to see them as a threat. He said, if we will have wars with other nations, then maybe the Israelites will fight against us. So they started oppressing them, and putting them to slavery, and they had to build pyramids and very hard slave labor. And then, well, just to skip a bit of the story, Moses was one of the Israelites, but was raised among the Jews because the Egyptians also said to kill all the firstborn of the Jews, and he escaped by being put in a basket, etc. He was raised with the Egyptians and so on. He sees a slave driver beating an Israelite man, and then he kills the slave driver, and then he has to run away to another country. And then God, at the mountain of Horeb, reveals himself to him in the burning bush and says, I am God, the God of your forefathers, and you have to take my people out of Egypt. So that's then what he does. And with the 10 plagues, Israel, the Egyptians are then forced to take to let the Israelites go. And all the time, every time Pharaoh says, yes, okay, now I'm going to let you go if you take away from me these frogs or darkness or these lice. And then in the end, he doesn't. And then the 10th plague is then the slaughtering of the first-born children of the Egyptians. And then, so the so God says, I'm going to kill all the firstborn children, but the people of Israel have to sacrifice a lamb and smear the blood on the doorpost and on the lintel. And when I pass through Egypt, I will pass through those, beyond those houses, and not kill those children. And all the Israelites then have to celebrate a feast. And this is then combined with the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So when the Israelites eat the Passover lamb, they also have to eat unleavened bread and bitter herbs. And the explanation why the bread is unleavened is because they had that night to flee away from Egypt, and there was no time to let the bread rise.
Yeah.
Then that's very interesting, actually. Then in Exodus 12, it says you have to continue to celebrate this every year to remember what has happened. So that's actually the beginning of the festival. And each year you have to eat the Passover lamb, and eat the unleavened bread, the bitter curds, and by eating, you remember, and in a sense, you relive the experience. I can say a little bit more about that, about the Seder and the Passover Haggadah in a minute. This was just a kind of long digression to explain what the piece of unleavened bread is.
Yeah.
So to not eat leavened bread, to remove all the yeast from the house. This is what Paul also says to the Corinthians. And then he refers to Jesus as the Pascha. So Jesus is the Passover lamb, according to Paul. Already, it's a very early stage, and this festival is somehow associated with Jesus. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean at that stage already the Christian calendar was building off of the Jewish calendar? We don't know exactly what and how Christians celebrated at that early stage. If you know that in the Synoptic Gospels, so Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the Last Supper takes place exactly at the moment of the Passover meal.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the slaughtering of the lamb. They eat the Passover meal as the Last Supper, Jesus and his disciples, which very possibly which very possibly hints at rituals that were celebrated in early Christian communities, and it is possible that they did that at that moment in the calendar. It becomes a little bit more interesting even that when in the Gospel of John, the crucifixion of Jesus himself happens at a different moment than it's recounted in the Synoptic Gospel. The crucifixion of Jesus actually happens at the moment of the sacrifice of the Passover lamb. So in the Gospel of John, Jesus himself is actually presented as the Passover lamb. And there are some other references like the hyssop, with which he gets some water, and the phrase that none of his bones will be broken, which also refers to the Passover lamb. So there, Jesus himself becomes the Passover lamb. So that's already, as you maybe know, the Gospel of John was written a bit later than the other Gospels. But you see that in the celebration and in the commemoration of Jesus' death, more and more this is interwoven with a calendar that was already existed, and that very likely all the first followers of Jesus, who were all Jews, were celebrating. That was one of the main festivals. So it's very likely that that was also part of the way in which they understood the story of Jesus. Maybe here it's also nice to say a little bit more about the Passover festival. So, as we said in Exodus 12, the people are told to always, again, celebrate how God has freed them, redeemed the people from Egypt every year, again and again, and to tell it to your children for all generations until eternity. And at a very early stage in the development of Judaism, we see that already in the early rabbinic literature, there is a liturgy that is developed for the Passover meal, for the Passover Seder, which is called the Haggadah, in which actually all of the story is really retold in the first person plural. So it doesn't tell the story about something that happened in the past, but it speaks about us, about something that's happened to us, which goes back to antiquity, and which speaks about the going out from Egypt as a live memory. And for example, it recounts the beginning of the people when Abraham left his ancestors, it gives a reason for that their ancestors were idolaters, so they were worshiping other gods, which is recounted in the book of Joshua. That is why Abraham left his people, and that was the beginning of going away from idolatry. And actually the Exodus, or going out of Egypt, is kind of the last step in the delivery from idolatry, from worshiping other gods. Only with the Exodus is there a complete break with idolatry, supposedly, because some things go wrong afterwards. And then the Passover Haggadah also says that in every generation, a person is obliged to see themselves as if they were redeemed from Egypt themselves. So it's not just something you remember from the past, but it's something that
is actively happening.
So it's reenacting and reperforming in a way like a theater play each year that is reperformed, and the performers themselves participate in that. And it has, also a deeper meaning. It's a kind of transformation. It's transformative, from slavery to freedom, and from sadness to joy, and from mourning to feasting, and from darkness to light, and from enslavement to redemption. So there's really this deeper meaning, and this actualized meaning, which already goes back to antiquity. So we can be quite certain that the first Christian and the first followers of Jesus also celebrate the festivals in a similar way, had similar connotations with the Exodus, with the redemption from Egypt. And it's, I think, very logical that after Jesus had died and kind of messianic notions were tied to him, that these were then also integrated in that performative practice, in that liturgy.
Oh, that is really interesting, especially how you can see the same trend still today, that Jesus freed us from slavery to sin, from darkness to light, and all that. It's really interesting how that just goes back all the way to then. And I'd love to know more, but we're out of time for the podcast. But I am excited to hear more about it during lectures, hopefully.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can just say one more thing about
Sure.
Scholarship, and I think and studying theology and religious studies, and why I think this is an interesting moment for us to work with these texts and with these traditions, because in the past biblical scholarship, especially in the 19th century, was very much focused on finding the earliest versions of the text, the sources underlying Gospels, for example, the sources underlying the text of the prophets, of the Pentateuch. And for about 200 years, scholars have been fighting each other about the tiniest details of finding this layer of text. And I think in the last 50 years, but the last decades especially, there's critique on that approach. And there's also, I think, a stronger interest among scholars to see not only how we can understand text going back to the earliest stage, which often we cannot, it's completely, to see how texts develop and have a life in successive generations over time, how they interpreted, reinterpreted, how texts are alive and are part of communities. Also, sometimes communities who interpret texts in different and sometimes conflicting ways, which, as we know, can also lead to huge problems. And in the case of the Bible, has also led to tension and violence, actually. But I think by studying that and also seeing, the performative aspect of text and how texts are alive in communities can also help us think about ways of reading and rereading texts that are perhaps more show hospitality to other traditions. And I think that maybe now, especially in the time of COVID, when we're all locked down in our houses and have to reflect a lot, maybe that's all. And as we are moving towards Passover, Easter, it's also, I think, a nice thing to reflect on how we can think about texts and traditions that are still alive with us today, that actually form our life, our calendar, our calendrical year, and the festivals we celebrate, even our weekend comes from the Bible. How we can also think of those traditions in a way that, can bring us closer together and help understand also the differences between different communities, and respect that. And I think that's perhaps that's my final message.
Very wise words to end the podcast. Thank you very much for being here. I found it very interesting. I hope you also enjoyed it.
Certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. And I hope we can soon again speak in real life. And
yes. We will go into spring hoping for that.
Yeah.
All right.
And happy Easter.
Yeah, happy Easter.